Developed by Cold Symmetry and published by Playstock originally for the Sony PlayStation 4, Microsoft Xbox One, on personal computer in 2020 was Mortal Shell. Playing as the Foundling, you're to explore the land of Fulgrim and to learn about the truth of possibly ascending from the mortal life at which is all that you know of. The main concept of the game was Vatra, the goddess who ruled or watched over all. Benevolent and understanding, she was the supreme authority, as Vatra eventually had among her countless Terran-based creations which were the Unborn. These Unborn were bizarre creatures, unlike anything else created by Vatra. Within these Unborn was a gland of magical, perhaps unknown or even mystical properties. The glands were pivotal to the game's story, but the gland can be secreted, even extracted if done correctly. But the concept of the Unborn's glands and what can be derived from them varied. Tar, the experience for the player amassed through the game, was considered to be the most unperfect or associated aspect of the gland. Aspects of Tar is so widespread that it's also used as a currency within Fulgrim. Nectar is what's secreted from the gland, a divine substance. It was only drunk by the Foundling to be transported to the dwellers of the temples and were only used for rituals. True nectar is the essence of the gland, as it's not possible to obtain or create true nectar without killing the Unborn at which the Foundling extracted it from. It's important to understand the functions of the glands from the Unborn because it was all a result of what Vatra later did. Due to her divine nature, she birthed everything in the world from her as mentioned, but she grew tired of the process, so she considered a new method to create divine beings. She essentially wanted a new high-tier god to be an heir, but not through herself, instead through her Unborn. The Unborn that she previously created were too few in number to sire a new generation of gods or goddesses, naturally, as the procedure was too painful or too time-consuming for Vatra to bother with. The exact reasons of why Vatra desired possibly a new generation of gods or goddesses, how or even why she gave birth, how often even gods were associated with birth or created were also unclear. Regardless, Vatra decided to create beings. She decided to use an alternate method of birth by having the beings born as seeds. These seeds were the Unborn at which were sent from Vatra to the world of mortals at which they would grow and be raised in the Terran plane of existence, instead of the violent and often painful method of birth that the original Unborn were conceived of. Once some of the seeds had fallen to the mortal plane, a warrior by the name of Hadern found them. Upon his observations of them, he realized that they were divine. A worshipper of Vatra, he believed the seeds to be worshipped and protected. Eventually, Hadern found his way to the then extraordinarily distant region of Fulgrim, once a region in a small kingdom whom had long since been forgotten, and all other details about it were also lost to time. Hadern decided to let the seeds grow there, but he eventually needed help in doing so. 3 nameless followers helped him. Hadern also met Solomon during this time as rudimentary structures were built throughout Fulgrim, and the region slowly settled by vagrants and vagabonds. Hadern eventually came to view the seeds as abominations of untold power and danger beyond comprehension. He eventually deduced that the seeds should be imprisoned and not raised. Due to a moral dilemma, he also disagreed with Solomon due to him devising a method to turn Tar into true nectar. The 3 followers of Hadern all drank massive amounts of the true nectar that Solomon had created, and they all naturally went mad as a result. The trio had drunk so much that it had warped and distorted Fulgrim into what was later depicted in the game. The trio were then worshipped as partial Unborn or demigods by their own servants. Due to the whole situation with the Unborn, glands, nectar on the trio, Vatra as the main goddess or being of worship and reverence was all but forgotten. The trio and the groups of followers they all had now dominated Fulgrim. Those who were uncorrupted by the chaos were Solomon, Hadern, and a few of the Vatra followers. Eventually, the few followers of Vatra were raising one of the Unborn that she had cast to the mortal plane, and this was a successful birth, as called the twin sister as well as the Foundling. Twin sister wasn't considered to be worthy as Hayden didn't bother with her. Solomon thought her to be a possible redemption. The Foundling had potential, but like twin sister was considered imperfect, so the Foundling slept. Ideology-based differences between Hayden and Solomon finally had the both of them separate. Vatra gave visions to Hayden through his dreams, as he later took these visions to assume that his point of view was correct with the situation that Fulgrim had degraded into. Hayden eventually thought that the Foundling could be the true attempt at salvation for himself and Solomon, as he couldn't make much more sense of the visions from Vatra than what he had assumed. Through an unknown amount of time later, both Hayden and Solomon died. Eventually, through the events in the game, the Foundling awoke and encountered visions of Hayden, and due to the imperfect aspects of the Foundling, it possessed dead bodies, hence mortal shells. The old prisoner was actually that of Solomon's brother, who wasn't as wise nor compassionate as he was. The brother in part came upon Solomon's research and desired the power of the glands to become a god himself. With all of the knowledge that he had, he was imprisoned and remained until the Foundling awoke. Not knowing any better, the Foundling was lied to by the prisoner and sent to kill the trio and extract the glands for the nectar. Eventually, the Foundling kills the trio and the old prisoner attempts to ascend to godhood, but is also killed by the Foundling. The dying words from Solomon's brother were that no matter what he had desired, it would not come to pass, for only Vatra could allow a creature to godhood through the drinking of the nectar to ascend, as the Foundling partook of the perfected nectar and ascended from the mortal plane to become a godling themselves. All of these details could and were missed by gamers when they went through their playthrough of the game. When the player assumed or acted as the Foundling, it couldn't speak, and interactions between the Foundling and other non-player based characters were already assumed that you, the player, knew about all of these related details that the game were built upon. But for casual gamers, this wasn't the case, and oftentimes players went through the game not fully understanding the stories or the characters associated with the circumstances within it. Mortal Shell was also considered to be a Souls-like game based on the From Software games, as there were other games that were inspired by Dark Souls. Developers of Mortal Shell publicly mentioned that it was a copy of a Souls game, and popular opinion had it that traits, features, and aesthetics of the game were even considered to be rip-offs from Dark Souls by those who had played the game. The game's lore and details were also intentionally vague due to the game's shortness when compared to other Soulsborne or Souls-like games. Receptions to the game were heavily divided upon release, with some considering the lore to be basic but could have been built upon or even added to. Others consider the lore to be lacking and not worth expanding upon or into. Sometimes a character can be forgotten because there were limitations of another depiction of characters in world building, or no one thought them to be worth much attention at all.